Welcome to Calvin's Stories, where a man who built everything refuses to be erased. Enjoy.
My name is Zane Hoffman. I'm 59 years old. On a Tuesday afternoon in a Scottsdale title office, I slid a 3-ring binder across a conference table toward a man my wife had introduced to me as her financial planner. Inside that binder were 14 signatures, each one supposedly mine, placed side by side with the originals I'd pulled from 31 years of audit reports. I looked at that man and said, "I brought the originals for comparison. Would you like to explain these to the notary or to the county prosecutor?" He stood up. He didn't reach for his briefcase. He didn't look at Linda. He walked out the door and left his leather bag sitting on the chair, like evidence he couldn't afford to touch. And Linda, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 27 years, turned to me with a face I'd never seen before and said 5 words I will never forget. But I'll get to those words. First, you need to understand what I found in my own house, in my own name, written in a hand that almost passed for mine. Welcome back to our channel. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped looking at what they were doing with your name, this story is going to land somewhere close. We share stories here about what happens when ordinary people discover extraordinary betrayals and find the spine to do something about it. If this is your first time, hit subscribe. If you've been here before, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever found your own signature on something you didn't sign? To understand how I ended up in that title office with a forensic binder and an attorney waiting in the parking lot, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to 1999, back to Chandler, Arizona, back to the foundation I poured with my own decisions and my own trust. I've been a forensic auditor for 31 years, senior forensic auditor for a Phoenix-based insurance carrier, which is a fancy way of saying I catch people who lie with numbers. I've built over 400 fraud cases in my career. I've sat across from executives who embezzled pension funds, from doctors who billed for surgeries they never performed, from contractors who invoiced for materials that don't exist. I know what a fabricated document looks like. The way a sommelier knows corked wine. The way a mechanic hears a failing alternator 3 seconds before anyone else in the room. My hands go steady when I open a file, and know within 10 seconds the numbers are lying. That steadiness has been my gift, my livelihood, and eventually the thing that saved everything I'd built. Linda and I married in 1997. I was 32. She was 29. We met at a charity auction in Tempe, one of those events where everyone holds a paddle and pretends they meant to bid that high. She was funny. Not performatively funny, genuinely funny, the kind of person who noticed absurdity and named it quietly so only you could hear. I fell in love with her specificity, the way she remembered the name of every waiter, every neighbor's dog, every teacher our boys ever had. We had 2 sons. Marcus came in 1999, the same year we broke ground on the Chandler house. Eli came in 2001. I built that house the way I build a case file. Every detail checked, every contractor verified, every line item reconciled. I chose the lot because you could see the Superstition Mountains from the kitchen window. And I wanted my boys to grow up looking at something ancient and immovable every morning. For 27 years, I audited strangers. I traced shell companies and reconstructed disbursement timelines for people I'd never met. And every evening I came home to Linda, who managed our household accounts, paid the bills, handled the mortgage correspondence, and organized our finances with what I believed was the same precision I brought to my cases. I never audited my own kitchen table. That sentence is the hinge of everything that follows. I caught fraud for a living, and I never once turned that eye toward the person sleeping next to me. Not because I was naive. Because trust, real trust, the kind you build over decades of shared meals and shared grief and shared silence, that trust becomes a room you stop inspecting. You live in it. You assume the walls are sound because you helped build them. The first crack appeared on a Wednesday in March. Linda had been talking for weeks about modernizing the house before retirement. She framed it as investment. The market in Chandler is up 14%, she said. We put money in now. We get it back triple when we downsize. She brought home contractor bids I never requested. 3 of them. A kitchen renovation, a garage conversion, and a pool house addition. I nodded through the first conversation because the logic sounded reasonable, and because Linda had always been the one who managed household projects while I was buried in case files. But that night, sitting in my home office, I flipped through the bids she'd left on the counter. The kitchen renovation bid referenced a lender I'd never contacted. Pacific Ridge Capital. I didn't recognize the name. I didn't recognize the loan officer's name, and the bid itself referenced an existing equity authorization that I had no memory of approving. I told myself it was a template. Contractors reuse templates. Lenders get auto-populated from previous client files. I explained it away the way I've watched hundreds of people explain away the first red flag in a fraud case. The human mind does not want to find what it is not looking for. I know this professionally. I teach it in training seminars, and I did it myself, sitting at my own desk, looking at a document that should have stopped me cold. 2 weeks later, the second crack. I was reviewing our HELOC statement, something I did quarterly as a matter of habit, not suspicion. There it was. A $38,000 equity draw attributed to approved home improvement. I had not signed any draw request. I had not spoken to anyone at our credit union about an equity draw. $38,000 had left our home's equity, and I had no memory of authorizing it. I brought it to Linda that evening, casually, the way you mention a mischarge on a credit card. Hey, did you see this draw on the HELOC? $38,000 for home improvement? She didn't look up from her phone. The bank pre-approved it automatically based on our equity ratio. It's part of the renovation package. Then she changed the subject to Eli's girlfriend and whether we should invite her to Easter dinner. The pivot was smooth. So smooth I almost followed it, but something in my chest tightened. Not suspicion exactly. More like the feeling I get at work when a CFO answers a question I didn't ask. She'd explained the mechanism of the draw. I hadn't asked about the mechanism. I'd asked if she'd seen it. The answer to my actual question would have been yes or no. Instead, she gave me a process explanation designed to make the question feel unnecessary. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan. The blades turned. The shadows moved across the plaster. Linda's breathing was steady beside me, and something in me, something trained by 3 decades of reading documents the way a cardiologist reads EKGs, that something whispered, "Pull the original." The next morning, I drove to our credit union before work. I requested the original draw documents for the $38,000 equity authorization. The branch manager, a woman named Patrice, whom I'd known for 15 years, printed them without hesitation. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened the envelope. The signature on the draw request was close to mine. Close enough that a teller processing routine paperwork would never question it. Close enough that Linda, watching over someone's shoulder, could point and say, "That's my husband's signature? He signed it last week." But the descender on the Y was wrong. In my signature, the Y in Hoffman dropped straight down and hooks left. I've signed audit reports 40 times a week for 31 years. I know my Y, the way a pianist knows middle C. This Y dropped and curved right. It was a mirror image. Someone had forged my signature from memory or from a photograph, and they'd reversed the hook on the only letter that mattered. My hands went steady. That's what happens when I open a file and know within 10 seconds the numbers are lying. The shaking comes later. The nausea comes later. In the moment of recognition, my body goes clinical. My breathing slows. My vision sharpens. I become the instrument I was trained to be. I sat in that credit union parking lot on a Thursday morning at 8:47 a.m., holding a document with my forged name on it, and I felt my entire marriage restructure itself behind my eyes. The anniversary dinner Linda planned last October, The one that felt so generous, so romantic. She'd insisted, said, we go to Scottsdale for stay overnight, make a weekend of it. I'd been touched. Now I sat in a parking lot and wondered, was that the weekend she needed me away from the mailbox? Was the romance the alibi? I didn't go home that night with accusations. I went home with coffee and kissed Linda on the forehead and asked about her day. Because I am a forensic auditor. And a forensic auditor does not confront with one document. A forensic auditor builds a case that is airtight, comprehensive, and devastating. I was not going to give Linda the chance to explain away one forged signature. I was going to find every single one, and then I was going to present them the way I present a fraud case, with originals, with comparisons, with timelines, with disbursement records, and with the calm, unblinking patience of a man who has done this 400 times for strangers, and is now, for the first and last time, doing it for himself. The investigation started the following Monday. I told Linda I had a complicated case at work that would keep me late several nights a week. That was not a lie. The case was complicated. It just happened to be hers. I started with the title records. I requested them from Maricopa County, a process that cost $12 and takes about 4 business days. When they arrived, I sat in my office at the firm after hours, door closed, desk lamp on, and spread the documents across my desk the way I've spread 400 other fraud timelines. 3 separate liens had been filed against our Chandler property in the previous 90 days. 3. Each one authorized by documents bearing my forged signature. Each one co-signed by Linda. The amounts were $38,000, $57,000, and $41,000. Together with a 4th disbursement I hadn't yet traced, the total equity drained from our home was $214,000. $214,000. Taken from a house I built from the foundation in 1999. Taken in my name, with my forged signature, by my wife of 27 years. I remember the exact moment I finished reading the 3rd lien document. I set it down on my desk. I aligned it with the other 2. I placed my actual signature beside each forged one. And then I put my head in my hands and did something I had not done since my father's funeral in 2011. I wept. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, chest-heaving grief of a man who has just learned that the room he lived in for 27 years had no walls at all. The next day, I pulled myself together and did what I do. I investigated. The $57,000 scope of work came into focus when a second contractor called the house, asking when Mr. Hoffman would be available to sign the final inspection. I answered the phone. I had never heard of the company. I had never heard of the project. 60% of the $57,000 had already been paid. I wrote down the contractor's name, the project number, and the payment schedule. I thanked him professionally. I told him I'd be in touch. Then I hung up and added the notes to a growing file that I kept in a locked drawer at my office, the same drawer where I store active fraud investigations for the insurance carrier. My wife's case was filed between a hospital billing scheme and an arson for profit claim. It was at this point that I brought in Dawn. Dawn Reyes is a forensic accountant at my firm. She's been my colleague for 11 years. She's precise, unflappable, and possessed of the rare ability to look at a spreadsheet and see a story. I asked her to lunch on a Friday, and over a plate of fish tacos she'll probably never enjoy again, I laid out what I'd found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. How many forged signatures total? I said I'd confirmed 4. She said, let's find the rest. Dawn traced the disbursement accounts. The $214,000 had not gone to contractors. Not directly. It had been routed through 4 limited liability companies, all registered under the name Brooke Callahan. Brooke was Linda's college roommate from Arizona State. They'd stayed close, lunches every few weeks, the kind of friendship I'd never questioned. All 4 LLCs had been formed within 6 months. All 4 were registered to a P.O. box in Tempe, and all 4 had received structured deposits, amounts deliberately kept just under the reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic bank scrutiny. Dawn sat back in her chair. When she finished the trace, she set down her pen. She closed the folder, and she said something that changed the trajectory of everything. Zane, this meets the statutory definition of financial elder exploitation under Arizona Revised Statutes 46456. This is not a marriage problem. This is a felony. I stared at her. The word felony landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I'd spent 31 years applying that word to strangers, to case numbers, to defendants I'd never met. Now Dawn was applying it to the woman who'd stood beside me at Marcus's college graduation, who'd held my hand at my father's funeral, who'd slept beside me 10,000 nights. Dawn's professional detachment gave me something I couldn't give myself. Permission. Permission to stop treating what Linda had done as a marital failure, as a communication breakdown, as something a couples therapist could address. It was a crime. It had elements. It had statutes. It had a victim, and the victim was me. But Dawn also hesitated. She warned me carefully that reporting my own wife could trigger mandatory elder abuse protocols that I could not control. Once the report was filed, the machinery of the state would engage. There would be investigators. There would be interviews. There would be exposure I couldn't manage or retract. She asked me if I understood that. I told her I did. She asked me if I was sure. I told her I was building the case first. When it was complete, when it was airtight, when every signature was documented and every disbursement was traced, then I would decide what to do with it. Dawn nodded. And from that Friday forward, she became my investigative partner, working evenings and weekends beside me, the way she'd worked on 400 cases for strangers. Except now the file on the desk had my name on it. The worst discovery came on a Saturday night. Linda was at dinner with Brooke. I opened her laptop. I am not proud of this. I am not ashamed of it either. When someone forges your signature to steal your home, you lose the luxury of feeling conflicted about reading their email. The laptop was logged into her personal account. I found the email on the third scroll. It was from Linda to Brooke, dated 11 days earlier. It referenced a neurologist appointment Linda had scheduled for me, an appointment I had never agreed to, an appointment I didn't know existed. The email explained the purpose. The neurologist visit establishes a baseline for cognitive decline documentation. Once we have that on file, the power of attorney becomes uncontestable. He still thinks I need his permission. By August, the house will be in the LLC and he'll be filing disability paperwork I wrote myself. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I sat in the dark of my home office and felt something I have no adequate word for. It was beyond betrayal. Betrayal is a moment. This was an architecture. Linda was not just stealing my money. She was not just forging my name. She was constructing a paper trail designed to have me declared cognitively incapacitated. She was going to take my house, my equity, my financial autonomy, and my legal personhood. She was going to do it with a neurologist who'd never met me, a power of attorney I'd never signed, and a college roommate who'd been building shell companies to receive the proceeds. She'd kissed my cheek goodnight with the same mouth that wrote, "He'll be filing disability paperwork." I wrote myself. I found the draft power of attorney document in her downloads folder. It named Brooke Callahan as alternate financial agent in the event of Zane's incapacitation. The document referenced the neurologist appointment. It was formatted to look like a legitimate legal instrument. It was not. It was a weapon designed to erase me from my own life. I saved everything. Screenshots, forwarded copies to an encrypted email account I created that night, timestamps, metadata. I worked until 3 a.m., and when Linda's headlights swept across the driveway at 3:20, I closed the laptop, walked to the bedroom, and lay in the dark with my eyes closed. She came in, smelling of wine and perfume. She slid under the covers. She whispered, "You awake?" I kept my breathing steady and didn't answer. She rolled over and within minutes was asleep. I lay beside her until dawn. Heart hammering, jaw clenched so tight my molars ached, and I ran the timeline. 11 days. That's how long I had before a neurologist I'd never met would start building a case that I was losing my mind. The masquerade was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the investigation. Harder than the confrontation. Harder than anything I've endured in 59 years of living. Because the investigation was work, I understood. It was methodical. It was procedural. It was the application of skills I'd spent 3 decades refining. But the masquerade was acting. And I am not an actor. I am a man who reads documents, who trusts evidence, who believes that facts should be spoken plainly. For 3 weeks I lied every day to a liar, and the effort of it nearly broke me in ways the betrayal itself could not. Dinners were the worst. Linda cooked. She'd always been a good cook. She made her green chili chicken the second Tuesday of the masquerade, and I sat across from her at the kitchen island, the same island I'd chosen the countertop for in 1999. And she said, "I was thinking we should talk to that planner again about the renovation timeline." I knew which planner she meant. I knew the planner was not a planner. I knew the renovation was not a renovation. I knew that every dollar she was discussing had already been dispersed through shell companies to a P.O. box in Tempe. And I said, "Sure, that makes sense. When were you thinking?" I cut my chicken. I chewed. The food had no flavor. My body was running on adrenaline and dread, and every bite was mechanical, every swallow deliberate, every nod calibrated to look like the nods of a man who trusts his wife. One evening, Linda reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad we're doing this together," she said. "This house deserves it." I looked at her fingers on mine. Those fingers had held a pen and forged my name 14 times. Those fingers had typed an email describing how I'd be filing disability paperwork, she wrote herself. Those fingers were squeezing my hand with manufactured warmth, and I had to squeeze back. I had to smile. I had to say, "Me too." The bile rose in my throat, and I swallowed it with water and asked if she wanted more rice. There was a Sunday dinner. Linda's mother was visiting. Linda raised her glass and said, in front of her mother and both our sons on speakerphone, "I would never make a decision about this house without you, Zane. We built this together. Every decision is ours." She looked at me with the steady, warm gaze of a woman who meant every word, and I held my glass and clinked it against hers and smiled. Because 3 days earlier, I had read her email to Brooke. I knew exactly what she meant by ours. She meant hers. She meant Brooke's. She meant the LLCs. She meant the forged signatures. She meant the neurologist appointment and the power of attorney and the disability paperwork she'd already drafted. I would never make a decision about this house without you. Every word a lie. Every syllable a performance. And I sat there and swallowed it because the case wasn't ready yet. The almost caught moment came on a Thursday evening. I'd been reviewing county records on my laptop at the kitchen table, cross-referencing lien, filing dates with Linda's calendar entries. She walked in from the garage, and I saw her eyes flick to my screen. "What are you working on?" she asked, and her voice carried a frequency I'd learned to recognize in 31 years of interviews, the slightly elevated pitch of someone who needs the answer to be harmless. "Property tax assessments," I said. "We've got a case involving undervalued commercial lots in Scottsdale. I'm pulling comps." She stood behind me for a moment. I could feel her breath on my neck. My hand was on the trackpad. One click and the screen would show Maricopa County lien records with our address highlighted. I didn't click. I didn't move. I waited. She kissed the top of my head and walked to the refrigerator. "Don't work too late," she said. My shirt was soaked through at the spine. I sat motionless for 3 full minutes after she left the room, then closed the laptop and went to the bathroom and gripped the sink until my knuckles went white. I'd been waking at 4 a.m. for 6 weeks, heart already pounding before my eyes opened, my body solving the equation my mind refused to write. Every morning I stood at the kitchen window with coffee, watching the Superstition Mountains turn gold in the early light. And I ran the numbers. Not the financial numbers. The personal ones. 27 years of marriage. 2 sons raised to adulthood. 10,000 mornings in this kitchen. And against that, 14 forged signatures, 4 shell companies, a fabricated cognitive decline strategy, and $214,000 stolen from the house I built with my own decisions. Dawn kept me from confronting too early. Twice I came to her office door ready to end the masquerade, ready to drive home and spread the evidence across the kitchen counter and watch Linda's face collapse. Twice Dawn said the same thing. Not yet. We need the full disbursement trail. We need the LLC formation records. We need the power of attorney draft authenticated. If you confront now, she has time to destroy evidence. If you wait, the case is airtight. Dawn was right. Dawn was always right. But the patience required to wait while sleeping beside the person who was trying to have you declared incompetent, that patience cost something I don't have language for. The case came together over the following 2 weeks. Every night after Linda fell asleep, I worked. I built the file the way I've built 400 fraud cases, with the same methodology, the same evidentiary standards, the same chronological precision. I compiled 14 forged signatures and placed each one beside a verified original from my work files. I printed the LLC formation documents Dawn had pulled from the Arizona Corporation Commission. I organized the disbursement records in chronological order, showing the structured deposits designed to evade reporting thresholds. I included the email to Brooke. I included the draft power of attorney. I included the neurologist appointment confirmation. And at the center of the binder, enlarged to courtroom scale, I placed the Y, my Y, and Linda's Y, the descender that drops left and the forgery that curves right. The single stroke of a single letter that had unraveled everything. I contacted attorney Rebecca Marsh on a Monday. She came recommended by the firm's legal department. I sat in her office with the binder and walked her through the case. The way I walk prosecutors through insurance fraud presentations. Evidence first, interpretation. Second, emotion never. Rebecca listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the binder to the power of attorney draft, read the neurologist reference, and looked up at me. This is premeditated financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Under Arizona law, you qualify as the protected party. I can have a temporary restraining order drafted by Wednesday. I told her Wednesday was fine. I told her the confrontation needed to happen at the title office meeting Linda had already scheduled for the following Tuesday. Rebecca understood immediately. She's bringing you to the meeting to get another signature, she said. I nodded. Then we let her set the stage, Rebecca said. And we use it. Linda planned a surprise anniversary dinner that same week. 27 years. She reserved a table at a restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, the same neighborhood where the title office sat. She bought a new dress. She told me she wanted us to celebrate what we've built. I sat across from her at dinner, candlelight on her face, and watched her perform devotion with the same precision she used to forge my signature. She reached for my hand across the table. She told me she was grateful. She told me she loved the life we'd made. And somewhere across town, the third lien she'd filed against our house 3 days earlier was sitting in the county recorder's office, bearing a signature I never made, authorizing equity I never released, funding an LLC I never knew existed. She raised her glass. I raised mine. The wine tasted like metal. I chose not to answer the toast. Instead, I said, "To the house." She smiled. She didn't hear what I meant. I meant to the house I'm about to take back. The neurologist appointment was 11 days away. That was my ticking clock. Once Linda got me into that office, once a physician documented a baseline assessment she could later use to claim cognitive decline, the power of attorney scheme gained a medical foundation I might never be able to dismantle. Every day I maintained the masquerade was a day closer to a doctor's appointment designed to erase my legal autonomy. The countdown gave the investigation its final urgency. The binder had to be complete. The attorney had to be ready. The restraining order had to be filed. Everything had to converge at the title office before that neurologist appointment could happen. The day before the confrontation, I sat in my home office with the completed binder on my desk. I opened it. I turned every page. 14 forged signatures, 4 LLC formation documents, disbursement records totaling $214,000, 3 county liens, 1 draft power of attorney, 1 email describing my future incapacitation in language so casual it could have been a grocery list, 1 forensic handwriting comparison prepared to courtroom standard, with my descending Y, and Linda's ascending Y enlarged to fill an entire page. I looked at the totality of what I'd assembled, and I felt the specific grief of seeing a 27-year marriage reduced to a 3-ring binder. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd trusted, everything I'd assumed was mutual and real, it fit inside 2 inches of paper. I closed the binder. I put my hand flat on the cover. And I said, out loud, to no one, tomorrow. That last evening, Linda was particularly warm. She made dinner. She asked about my day. She laughed at something on television and leaned into my shoulder on the couch. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the woman I'd married. The woman who noticed absurdity and named it quietly. The woman who remembered every waiter's name. And I felt the doubt rise. What if I was wrong? What if the signatures had an explanation? What if the LLCs were legitimate? What if the email was taken out of context? The doubt lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then I remembered the phrase, "He still thinks I need his permission." And the doubt died. Because that sentence was not ambiguous. That sentence was not taken out of context. That sentence was a woman describing her husband as an obstacle to be managed, and the management strategy was to have him declared incompetent by a doctor he'd never agreed to see. I kissed her forehead goodnight. I went to the bedroom. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. And I slept, for the first time in weeks, without waking at 4. The Scottsdale title office occupied the 2nd floor of a stucco building on Camelback Road, the kind of building that looks like every other professional suite in the Valley of the Sun. Tinted glass, beige carpet, a reception area with a water feature that made a sound like someone slowly pouring a glass you couldn't see. I arrived 20 minutes early. I parked in the lot and sat in my car with the binder on the passenger seat. Rebecca Marsh was parked 3 spaces away. She had the temporary restraining order in a manila envelope on her dashboard. We made eye contact through our windshields. She nodded. I nodded. Then I picked up the binder, got out of the car, and walked into the building. The elevator was slow. I stood in it alone, the binder under my arm, watching the floor numbers change on a digital display that flickered slightly between 1 and 2. The doors opened onto a hallway with gray industrial carpet, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they haven't slept. I could hear the water feature before I reached the suite door, that perpetual pouring sound, water falling into a basin it would never fill. I pushed the glass door open. The receptionist smiled. She told me the conference room was ready. She said it the way you'd say it to any client arriving for any routine appointment. And I realized that from her side of the desk, that's exactly what this was. A Tuesday meeting. A signature appointment. Paper moving from one side of a table to the other. She had no idea what was inside the binder I carried. No idea that the man walking past her desk with a polite nod was about to dismantle a 27-year fraud in a room with beige walls and a view of the parking lot. Linda was already in the conference room with the man she'd introduced as her financial planner. His name was Gerald Oakes. He wore a blue suit and a confident smile. And he shook my hand like a man who believed I was there to sign whatever he put in front of me. His handshake was firm and practiced. The grip of someone who shook hands for a living, and his palm was dry. Linda sat to his left, legs crossed, a leather portfolio in front of her that I recognized as the one she kept in her closet. She looked relaxed. She looked like a woman who had done this before and expected it to go the same way. Her blouse was the pale blue one she wore when she wanted to project calm. I had seen her choose it that morning from the closet, holding it up against two others before settling on it. And I had watched her the way you watch someone rehearsing for a performance they don't know you can see. There was a notary at the far end of the table, a young woman with a stamp and a logbook, waiting to witness whatever signatures this meeting produced. She had a pen lined up parallel to the logbook's spine, and her posture was the posture of someone who expected to be kneaded briefly and then released. I sat down across from Gerald. I set the binder on the table. It was a plain black 3-ring binder, the same kind I use for fraud presentations at work. Gerald glanced at it without interest. "So," he said, "Linda tells me you're ready to move forward with the equity restructuring. I have the documents prepared." He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. I placed my hand on the binder instead. The folder sat between us, untouched, and I could see the top page through the transparent cover. Another signature line, another place where my name was supposed to go, another document designed to move money from my house into Linda's architecture of shell companies. "Before we start," I said, "I'd like to discuss some documents I've been reviewing." Linda's eyes moved to the binder. Something shifted behind her face. Not fear, yet. Alertness. The expression of an animal that hears a sound it can't identify. Her left hand moved to the edge of the leather portfolio and stayed there, fingers resting lightly on the zipper, as if the portfolio were something she might need to close or open quickly, depending on what happened next. I opened the binder to the first tab. "This is a HELOC draw request for $38,000, dated March 14th. I turned it so Gerald could see. "The signature on this document is attributed to me." I placed the original beside it, an audit report I'd signed the same week. "This is my actual signature from the same date. I'd like you to look at the descender on the Y." Gerald looked. His smile faded by degrees, like a dimmer switch being turned down slowly. The confidence left his face in layers. First the smile went, then the set of his jaw loosened. Then his eyes narrowed, and I watched them move back and forth between the two signatures, with the quick, scanning motion of someone who has just been shown something he cannot explain. He looked at Linda. Linda did not look at him. She was looking at the binder. She was looking at it the way you look at a door that has just opened onto a room you didn't know existed. "The Y in my signature descends and hooks left," I said. "The Y on this draw request descends and curves right. This signature is a forgery." I turned to the next tab. "This is a contractor authorization for $57,000 bearing the same forged signature." Next tab. "A lien filing for $41,000. Next tab. "A second lien." Next tab. "A third." I kept turning. 14 tabs, 14 signatures, each one placed beside an original, each one showing the same reversed Y, the same careful imitation that was almost perfect, but not quite, never quite, because Linda had learned my signature from photographs, and photographs reverse the image. The sound of each tab turning was the only sound in the room, that and the muffled pouring of the water feature through the wall. I counted the seconds between tabs. I gave each page 4 full seconds of silence before turning to the next. I had learned that rhythm in depositions. 4 seconds is long enough for a document to be absorbed and short enough that the person across the table cannot formulate a defense before the next one arrives. Gerald's face had gone the color of the beige carpet. He looked at the documents. He looked at Linda. He looked at the notary, who had stopped writing and was staring at the binder with the expression of someone who has just realized they are witnessing a crime scene. The notary's pen was still in her hand, but her hand had drifted away from the logbook and was hovering above the table as if she'd forgotten she was holding anything at all. Gerald stood up. He did not reach for his briefcase. He did not offer an explanation. He did not look at me again. He walked to the door, opened it, and left. His leather briefcase remained on the chair, the brass clasps catching the overhead fluorescent light. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. The briefcase sat there for the rest of the meeting. No one touched it. No one mentioned it. It became the kind of object that exists in a room, as a monument to the moment someone decided that what they were carrying was less important than where they needed to be, which was anywhere but here. Linda and I were alone with the notary. The water feature in the reception area made its pouring sound. The air conditioning hummed, a low mechanical drone that seemed louder now that Gerald's chair was empty. Linda sat perfectly still, her hands flat on the table, her leather portfolio untouched in front of her. The overhead light caught the face of her watch, and I noticed the time, 2:17 p.m. I noted it the way I note timestamps in every case file, the moment the confrontation became a conversation between two people who both knew the truth. "Linda," I said. I kept my voice level. The same voice I use in depositions. The same voice I use when I present evidence to prosecutors. The voice that has no heat in it, no tremor, no invitation to argue. I've identified 14 forged signatures across 4 equity draw requests, 3 lien filings, and 7 contractor authorizations. The total disbursement is $213,000. The funds were routed through 4 LLCs registered to Brooke Callahan at a P.O. box in Tempe. Linda opened her mouth. Her tongue touched her upper lip, and for a fraction of a second she looked like someone preparing to deliver a line she'd rehearsed. "Zane, those LLCs are investment vehicles. Brooke was helping us diversify our..." I turned to the next tab. "This is the LLC formation record for Callahan Holdings LLC, formed April 2nd. This is the formation record for Desert Ridge Capital LLC, formed April 19th. This is the formation record for Copper Basin Ventures LLC, formed May 3rd. This is the formation record for Sonoran Equity Partners LLC, formed May 29th. All 4 formed within 6 months. All 4 registered to the same P.O. box. All 4 receiving structured deposits kept deliberately below the reporting threshold of $10,000. I looked up. "The structuring alone is a federal offense, Linda. You know that." Her jaw tightened. I could see the muscles in her neck cord. Her voice dropped half a register. "Brooke is a legitimate businesswoman. She was managing..." Tab 11, I said. I turned to it. "This is a draft power of attorney naming Brooke Callahan as alternate financial agent in the event of my incapacitation." I watched Linda's face. The alertness was becoming something else now. Something raw. The color had left her cheeks and settled somewhere below her collarbone, a flush creeping up from her chest toward her throat. "This document references a neurologist appointment you scheduled for me. An appointment I never agreed to. An appointment designed to create a medical record suggesting cognitive decline." I paused. I let the silence sit on the table between us. 22 seconds. I counted them by the pulse in my wrist. I let the silence do its work, the way I let silence work in 400 depositions. "Would you like to explain the medical appointment, or should I continue?" Linda's composure broke for the first time. Not into tears. Into anger. Her hands lifted from the table and curled into fists at her sides, and her voice came out in a register I had heard only twice in 27 years of marriage, both times during arguments so severe that one of us had slept in the guest room. "You went through my laptop," she said. Her voice was low and tight and shaking. "You had no right." "Taught tab 12, I said. I turned to it. "This is your email to Brooke, dated 11 days ago. I'll read the relevant passage. He still thinks I need his permission. By August, the house will be in the LLC, and he'll be filing disability paperwork I wrote myself." I set the page down. The paper slid slightly on the polished conference table and came to rest with the email visible, the words facing up, black text on white paper, as ordinary and devastating as a receipt for something that can never be returned. "Those are your words, Linda, not mine, not Brooke's, yours." The silence in that room was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It had a physical quality, a pressure, like altitude. The notary had closed her logbook. She had capped her pen and set it down beside the logbook, with the careful, deliberate movement of someone withdrawing from a situation that has exceeded her professional scope. She was looking at the door, like she wanted to follow Gerald through it. Linda sat with her hands still flat on the table, but her fingers were trembling now, the fine tremor visible against the dark wood. I could see each finger individually, the knuckles whitening as she pressed them into the surface. Her wedding ring caught the light. It was the ring I'd put on that hand in 1997, in a garden in Tempe, in front of 60 people who believed what I believed. "Zane," her voice changed. The anger drained out, and something else flowed in, something softer, something that sounded almost like the woman I married, almost, but not quite. The way her forged Y was almost mine, but not quite. "This isn't what it looks like. Brooke convinced me that restructuring the equity would protect us in retirement. I didn't understand the legal..." You forged my signature 14 times, Linda. You filed 3 fraudulent liens against our home. You created 4 shell companies to receive the proceeds. And you drafted a power of attorney designed to have me declared incompetent." I closed the binder. The sound of the cover meeting the back was a sound I had heard hundreds of times in conference rooms across Maricopa County. The sound of a case being shut. This is not a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family. You were trying to take my house, my equity, my legal identity, and you were doing it with the systematic precision of someone who had planned every step. I kept my hands flat on the binder. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward. I sat the way I sit when I deliver findings to a board of directors, still, upright, and certain. Linda's face did something I will never forget. It went through 3 expressions in the space of 5 seconds. The first was the remnant of the performance, the warm, concerned wife who was being misunderstood. Her eyebrows lifted, her lips parted. The muscles around her eyes softened in a way designed to invite sympathy. The second was calculation, the quick lateral thinking of someone looking for an exit that hadn't been blocked yet. Her eyes moved to the binder, to the door, to the notary, back to me, measuring distances and options with the same efficiency she'd used to measure deposit amounts against reporting thresholds. And the third, the one that settled and stayed, was the face behind all the faces. The face of someone who had been caught and knew it, and was trying to determine how much of the damage she could still control. Her chin dropped half an inch. Her shoulders squared. Her trembling stopped. It was, in its own terrible way, the most honest I had seen her in years. "You were never supposed to look at the paperwork," she said, and there it was. Not a denial, not an explanation, not a plea. A complaint about operational security. She wasn't upset that she'd done it. She was upset that I'd found it. The sentence hung in the air-conditioned room like a verdict delivered before the trial. I heard the notary shift in her chair. I heard the water feature pouring its endless glass. I heard the faint tick of the clock on the wall above the door. A sound I hadn't noticed until that moment, as if the room itself had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. "I look at paperwork for a living, Linda," I said. That's the one thing you should have remembered. I heard the conference room door open behind me. The hinges were silent, but the air changed. A slight movement of pressure as the door swung inward. Rebecca Marsh stepped in, manila envelope in hand. She was wearing a gray suit and her reading glasses were pushed up on her head, and she carried herself with the composed authority of someone who has walked into hostile conference rooms before and knows exactly where to stand. She introduced herself to Linda as my attorney and placed the temporary restraining order on the table. The order froze all 4 LLCs, froze the HELOC, froze every account linked to the disbursements. Rebecca explained the terms in precise legal language, while Linda stared at the document as though it were written in a language she no longer spoke. Rebecca's voice was steady, clinical, and unhurried. She read each provision once. She did not repeat herself. She did not look up from the document. When she finished, she placed a pen beside the order, not for Linda's signature, but as a visual anchor, a small object that said, "This is real. This is happening. This is now." Linda did not touch the pen. She did not touch the order. She sat with her hands in her lap, and I watched the last architecture of her composure fail. Not dramatically. Not with tears or shouting. Just the slow, silent collapse of a face that has run out of performances to give. If you're still listening to this, if this story is doing something to your chest right now, take a moment, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me, because what happened next is the part most people never get to see. What it looks like when every wall a person built to protect their lies comes down at once. What Linda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every countermeasure was already complete before she walked into that title office. The liens had been contested and flagged with the Maricopa County Recorder 2 weeks earlier. The forged signatures had been reported to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. The HELOC had been frozen by the credit union's fraud department after I provided the forensic handwriting analysis. And the power of attorney draft, along with the email to Brooke, had been submitted as evidence of premeditated financial exploitation. Linda had lost the house, the accounts, the shell companies, and her legal standing months before she realized I knew anything. She had been living in her own masquerade, performing the role of a woman in control while the ground beneath her had already been removed. The irony is precise and merciless. For 3 weeks, I had performed for her. For 2 months before that, the legal system had been performing for me. Quietly, paperwork moving through offices she never visited, flags being placed on accounts she believed were untouchable. We had both been acting. The difference was that my performance had an evidence file behind it. The days after the confrontation unfolded like a controlled demolition. Each wall fell in sequence. Gerald Oakes, the financial planner, retained his own attorney within 24 hours and began cooperating with the county investigation. His briefcase was collected from the conference room by a paralegal from his attorney's office the following morning. I was told he did not come himself. Brooke Callahan received notice that all 4 LLCs were frozen and under investigation for structuring violations. The contractors who had been told I authorized their projects received copies of the forensic signature analysis and suspended all remaining work. One of them, the contractor who'd called the house about the $57,000 project, left me a voicemail that said simply, "Mr. Hoffman, I'm sorry. I had no idea." His voice was shaking. He was a man who'd done honest work on a dishonest contract, and I felt no anger toward him. I felt nothing toward him at all. My anger had a specific address, and it was not his. And Linda, who had spent months constructing an alternate financial reality with the patience and precision of someone building a second house inside the walls of the first, watched every room of that invisible house collapse. Each frozen account was a room going dark. Each contested lien was a wall coming down. Each cooperating witness was a door being sealed from the other side. She tried to get ahead of the narrative. She called Marcus first, then Eli. She told them a version of events in which I had overreacted to a simple financial restructuring, in which Brooke was a legitimate advisor, in which the power of attorney was a precautionary document any responsible spouse would prepare. She presented herself as a woman, blindsided by her husband's paranoia. It lasted less than a day. I sent both boys the binder. Not as retaliation, as record. They deserve to know the truth, the way any adult child deserves to know the truth, when one parent has tried to erase the other from their own life. I included a note with each copy. The note said, "Read this when you're ready. I will answer any question you have. I love you." Marcus called me that evening. His voice was flat and careful, the voice of a man holding something fragile and trying not to break it. "Dad," he said, the email about the disability paperwork, did Mom really write that?" I told him yes. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. I could hear what sounded like a television in another room, muffled voices from a world where nothing had collapsed. Then he said, "I'm coming to Chandler this weekend." Eli called 20 minutes later. He didn't say much. His voice was thicker than Marcus's, closer to breaking, but holding. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was. He said he'd call Linda himself, and I let him. I did not ask what he said to her. That was between them. But I know he called, and I know the call was short. Linda's attorney contacted mine the following week. There were discussions about the criminal referral, about the county attorney's decision to pursue charges, about the possibility of a plea arrangement that might keep the case out of court. I was not part of those discussions. I had built the case. I had presented the evidence. The legal machinery was now running on its own fuel. I had spent 31 years feeding cases into that machinery for strangers. Now it was processing my own. And I discovered that the experience of being a victim in a system you understand professionally is its own particular kind of disorientation. You know every gear. You know every step. You know the timelines, and the statutes, and the probable outcomes. And none of that knowledge insulates you from the experience of being the name on the file instead of the name on the report. The house became mine. The title was cleared. The liens were removed. The Hellock was restored to my sole control. I walked through the rooms of the Chandler house. On the evening the final paperwork was signed, and I saw every room differently. The kitchen where Linda had cooked green chile chicken while planning her next forged signature. The home office where I'd sat at 3 a.m. saving screenshots of her emails. The bedroom where I'd lain beside her night after night during the masquerade, jaw clenched, heart pounding, performing the role of a man who didn't know his life was being dismantled. The guest bathroom where I'd gripped the sink until my knuckles went white after she'd almost seen the county records on my screen. The living room couch where she'd leaned into my shoulder and laughed at the television. And I'd felt for 7 seconds the doubt that almost undid everything. The house was the same house. Every wall, every window, every tile I'd chosen in 1999. But the light in it was different. The Superstition Mountains were visible through the kitchen window. The same view I'd chosen the lot for. And they stood in the late afternoon sun, the way they'd stood for millions of years. Indifferent to what had happened inside these walls. The light was mine. The leather portfolio Linda had brought to the title office sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days after the confrontation. I didn't open it. I didn't move it. It sat there beside the fruit bowl, ordinary and terrible. A leather rectangle with a brass zipper that could have been a gift from a department store. On the 4th day, I picked it up. The leather was warm from the sunlight that came through the kitchen window in the afternoons. Inside was a set of documents she'd prepared for me to sign at that meeting. Another equity draw, another forged authorization template, this one with a blank line for my signature. She'd brought me there to sign my own dispossession in real time, in front of a notary, with a smile on her face. The draw amount on the blank document was $78,000. That would have brought the total to $292,000. Nearly $300,000 extracted from a house I built in 1999 with my own decisions. I looked at the blank signature line. I closed the portfolio. I put it in the binder with everything else. Then I put the binder in the locked drawer at my office, filed between the hospital billing scheme and the arson for profit claim, where it would stay until the county attorney needed it. Dawn and I had lunch the week after the confrontation. Same restaurant, same table, different world. She ordered the fish tacos again. I ordered coffee. We sat for a while without talking. The restaurant was louder than I remembered it being on that first Friday, when I'd laid out the case over plates neither of us could finish. This time the noise felt appropriate. It felt like the world continuing, indifferent to what we'd just done, and that indifference was a relief. Then she said, "How does it feel?" And I said, "Like finishing a case and realizing you're the plaintiff." She nodded. She understood. We'd built 400 cases together, Dawn and I. We'd traced millions of dollars through shell companies and fabricated invoices and forged documents. We'd done it with professional detachment, with clinical precision, with the satisfaction of people who are good at finding what others hide. But this case had been different. This case had my name on it. And the bond formed through building it together. The nights and weekends, the locked office doors, the quiet focus of two people reconstructing a fraud timeline that happened to be a marriage. That bond was not ordinary professional partnership. It was something sturdier, something tested. Dawn picked up her water glass and held it up. She didn't say a toast. She just held it up, and I lifted my coffee cup, and we touched them together over the table without a word. 3 months passed. The Chandler house settled into a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of a shared life, not the comfortable silence of two people who know each other's rhythms. A new quiet. The quiet of a house with one person in it who is learning what it sounds like when the performance is over. I heard sounds I'd never noticed in 27 years. The settling of the roof beams at night, the way the refrigerator cycled on and off every 43 minutes, the particular pitch of the wind through the mesquite tree beside the back patio, a sound Linda's voice had always covered, without my knowing it. I developed a routine. Coffee at 6 a.m., standing at the kitchen window, watching the Superstition Mountains catch the first light. The mountains were the reason I'd chosen the lot in 1999. They were ancient and immovable. And in the months after Linda left, they became the most reliable thing in my visual field. They didn't change. They didn't perform. They didn't forge my signature on anything. They just stood there, red and gold and indifferent. And I found that indifference comforting in a way I couldn't have predicted. There was a morning, about 10 weeks after the title office, when the light hit Flatiron at such an angle that the entire face of the mountain turned the color of copper. I stood at the window holding my coffee with both hands and watched it for 11 minutes. It was the longest I had been still, without working, without thinking about the case, without running numbers since March. The mountain turned copper, and then gold, and then white, as the sun climbed, and I stood there and let it happen. And I felt something that was not happiness exactly, but was adjacent to it. It was the sensation of standing in a room that belonged to me, entirely, without question, without a forged signature, anywhere in the chain of title. One morning, 3 months after the title office, my phone rang while I was making coffee. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Scottsdale. I let it ring twice, then answered. It was Linda's attorney requesting a settlement call. He used the word resolution. He used the phrase path forward. He spoke in the measured tones of a man who had read the binder and understood that his client's position was not strong. I looked at the phone. I looked at the mountains. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished my coffee standing at the window, watching the sunrise paint the superstitions in shades of amber and rust, and I chose not to answer. Not from anger, not from spite, not from the desire to punish, from calm. The first real calm I had felt in 27 years. Because for 27 years I had lived inside a structure I believed was shared. A marriage, a home, a financial life, an identity. And the effort of maintaining trust in that structure had been a weight I carried without knowing I carried it. Now the structure was gone. The weight was gone. And what remained was a man standing in his own kitchen, in his own house, drinking his own coffee, looking at mountains that asked nothing of him and lied about nothing. The settlement call happened eventually, on my terms, on my timeline. Rebecca handled it. The details are not mine to share in full, because the legal process is still grinding forward in the way legal processes do, slowly, thoroughly, and with the kind of institutional patience that mirrors my own. What I can tell you is that Linda did not keep the house. Linda did not keep the accounts. Linda did not keep the legal fiction she'd constructed. And the neurologist appointment, the one designed to have me declared incompetent, the one 11 days away on the morning I read that email. It never happened. I canceled it myself with a single phone call. The receptionist asked if I wanted to reschedule. I said no. She asked if everything was all right. I said it was getting there. I used to think trust was the foundation of a marriage. I was wrong. Trust is the roof. The foundation is verification. I spent 31 years verifying documents for strangers and took my own wife's word on faith. And that asymmetry almost cost me my home, my savings, and my legal identity. I don't say that to be cynical. I say it because it's true. And because the difference between what I believed about trust and what I now know about trust is the difference between living in a house and inspecting one. If you sign documents your spouse brings home without reading every line, I'm not judging you. I did it too, and I catch fraud for a living. But tonight, pull your county title record online. It costs $12. And if there's a lien you don't recognize, you have your answer. Studies show that 1 in 4 cases of financial elder exploitation is perpetrated by a family member. And according to the National Center on Elder Abuse, fewer than 1 in 44 cases of financial exploitation are ever reported. Those numbers existed before my story. They exist because of stories like mine. Stories where the person you trust most is the person with the most access and the least accountability. What would you do if you found your own signature on a document you never signed? I'm standing at my kitchen window as I tell you this. The coffee is hot. The mountains are gold. The binder is in a locked drawer at my office, filed between 2 cases that belong to strangers. The counter is clean. The phone is face down. And the Y at the end of my name, when I sign it now, drops straight and hooks left. The way it always has. The way it always will. That's the story. 1 reversed letter on a bank form, 1 email that described my future in someone else's handwriting, and 1 locked drawer where a 31-year career met a 27-year marriage, and the career won. If you've ever looked at a signature and felt something wrong in your chest, before your mind could name it, drop that in the comments. Subscribe if this is the kind of story that stays with you. And if you're lying in bed tonight next to someone whose paperwork you've never checked, maybe tomorrow morning is the morning you start. I'll be here when you get back. Take care of yourselves and take care of what you've built.